Welcome to Universal Man, where we turn your flight into fight so that you can master yourself and conquer your goals. My name is Mark Weapon. I'm here to help you sharpen your masculine edge. In today's video, what I'm going to be talking about is how to deal with the fact that many women view walking around half naked as a form of empowerment. And basically, what I think that really boils down to is the power to manipulate men. And so what I want to talk about is how to avoid being manipulated, learning how to be true to yourself no matter what that woman is wearing. I understand this idea that women have that exposing their body is a form of empowerment. And here's the thought process behind it. The idea is that throughout history, women have been kind of like sexual property in a way. Like they didn't have much sexual agency or ownership. They were pretty much controlled by men in a lot of ways. And so they view like the ability to display their sexuality freely and to do what they want with it as a form of empowerment. And I can kind of get that because, you know, hey, maybe things were pretty repressive in the past. I would say that they were, at least for the women. It was pretty much the guys who held all the power and that sort of thing. But the issue is, it's like, all right, well, now they have the power back, and what are they doing with it? What are they doing with it now that they have this power? It's kind of like, it's almost like you have, like when you're young, you feel like all controlled and repressed by your parents. It's like, oh, I want to have this power. And then, you know, when you go off to college, what is the first thing you do with all that new freedom? You know, you make a bunch of bad decisions, get really drunk, and, you know, be silly. And that's kind of like what I see this whole, you know, display of exhibition of females' bodies. That's what I think it is. It's kind of like an overreaction, and I don't know how really empowering in a positive way it is. Now, it definitely does have power. It definitely does empower women in a sense. It's just, I don't think it's necessarily in a positive sense. The power is that they can manipulate men. You know, they can cause men to pay them attention because of what they're wearing. I mean, it's just the way it is. And a lot of women will say, well, I'm not doing it for men. I'm wearing this for myself. I'm displaying my cleavage in a push-up bra for me. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm sure it's for you, but like, why is it for you? Why do you like that? Well, I mean, yeah, there's arguments for its style, and I like the way it looks. Well, why do you like the way it looks? Why has style evolved to make the presentation of your sexual assets desirable? Well, it's because it controls men. So it's like whether a woman is doing this consciously or not, whether she really believes that she is displaying her body for men or not, doesn't really matter if you're a man. Because if a woman's walking around in yoga pants, or she's walking around with, you know, her chest hanging out and that sort of thing, you're going to feel that, and you're going to, you know, it's going to impact you in your ability to show up as the person that you want to be. And that's kind of the real problem here, is that unless you know how to handle this sort of situation as a man, you become a puppet. And this happens all the time. Guys are constantly manipulated into showing up as less than their best selves because they've been manipulated by a beautiful woman. And it's just, you know, it's kind of like wired into us. It's kind of like on like a base kind of primal level, it's a good thing that guys kind of have trouble controlling themselves around women, because that makes it so that the default is an activity that leads to reproduction. You know, the default is a man with low sexual self-control, you know, he has sex as much as he can, and the human race continues. Okay, so that's like the default. But we're a little bit more sophisticated than that in the modern world, and we don't need to be such slaves to our conditioning or our primal sort of instinctual behavior. We can find a better way to show up. And that's what I think this comes down to, is learning how to own your sexuality, learning how to make it under your control. And so what that means is that your self-control, your own personal power, has to be greater than the level of attraction that you feel for the women that you see. You know, it has to be greater. Otherwise, you will become this puppet. And any woman who walks by who's, you know, fits your sexual template will be able to stick her claws like right into your brain and make you dance for her. And frankly, that's not in your best interest at all. It might be in her best interest, or at least in the short term. And this is why I think that this is championed by many women in this kind of feminist movement, because they like the power. They like the power that they have. But, they're not necessarily always fair about the way in which they want this kind of displayed. It's kind of like, on one hand, it's like, I want to have the power to have everybody look at me and want me, and I want that attention. But if you're unattractive or you're creepy or, you display your affection in a way that I don't appreciate, well, then that's not okay. And I get that. It's like you want to be able to dress how you want and not be sexually accosted or assaulted or harassed or anything like that. Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. I believe 100% that I should be able to walk down any street in any city in any project with money falling out of my pockets and not be mugged. But, there's a level of naivety here. There's a level of holding an ideal of how the world should work in a moral sense versus how it actually works. You can't rule out the fact that some people aren't good. And by displaying yourself and putting yourself in certain positions, you will attract certain kinds of attention that maybe you don't really want. So it's like, if you don't want the negative sexual attention, then broadcasting your sexual signals to men doesn't help you out. But, speaking about the reality of bad people is not the same thing, or men with low self-control is not the same thing as blaming a victim. I'm not saying it's on the woman. I'm just saying be smart. But that's kind of a side tangent. The real thing here about owning your sexuality, the struggle for men, I think, is that so many men have spent so much time projecting everything onto sex. And this is in part because of our biological nature, our biological drive towards sex, where we have this tendency, I think, to put sex at the pinnacle of life because, it's so important to life. It benefits us to have such a high appreciation for it. But I think our culture also facilitates this process. It makes it's constantly selling guys the idea that their heaven exists in sexual stimulation, basically. That, like, if you want your heaven on earth, it's going to be found through finding that perfectly hot woman and learning and being able to have sex with her as much as you can, and as basically having all the sex that you want. Have all of that sex, all the women, everything. That's heaven. That's what we're taught as men. And that, like, if we're going to put that in spiritual terms, I would say that is kind of like the sin or the failing of idolatry. If it's, or in crasser terms, it's putting the pussy on a pedestal. Okay. And most men, they've spent the majority of their lives worshiping at the altar of the pussy. And they've done it every single time they sit down to jerk off and masturbate to porn or whatever. They've learned how to submit not just their rationality and emotionality and energy, just like their morality too, to this ideal of feminine stimulation and perfection. And so if you've done that, well, you've got a big backlog of conditioning that you need to work through. And it's a painful thing to come out of. And that's what a lot of my other work is about. It's like learning how to kill this part off, learning how to kill off this dead wood of, dysfunctional conditioning where you projected your infinite human desires onto this finite thing of sex. It's like you got to break that, okay? You have to break that. You have to live in reality. If heaven exists, it doesn't exist in this life. It exists in an afterlife. And trying to get heaven, this infinite thing, this infinite goodness, this perfection out of a finite thing, that's just a recipe for madness. It's a recipe for addiction. It's not going to work. And so what are your options? What are your options? Either you keep kind of chasing the dragon in terms of sexual stimulation, or you wake up and you work with reality. And so there's kind of like two divergent paths that I think are presented to men who come to this realization. One is to just kind of nihilistically play the game. And that's really, the term game, that's really the answer. It's like that's what these guys who are in the pickup artist community say. They'll say the answer is just have sex with a lot of women, recognize what they are, and learn how to manipulate them instead of being manipulated by them. And then you can score and keep your interests well preserved. Okay. And I don't agree with that. I think that whole path is just another form of masturbation. It just wastes a lot of time, a lot of energy. And I think it's a sterile life that produces nothing really of value other than a bunch of empty orgasms and a false sense of status that doesn't really amount to much. And so I don't agree with that whole path. Plenty of guys out there who do, whatever. I think the better option then is to live in the reality of this world, is to try to pursue real long-term happiness and meaning through a committed relationship. Get married, have kids, learn how to restrict your sexuality to that woman, and see that restriction as something sacred. Learn how to get greater meaning from that relationship by the fact that it is limited. Learn how to see that as a source of value. I think I've talked about this before, but I think sexuality can only be sacred when it is limited, because then it becomes something special. And so you have to learn how to cut off these external stimuli. And it's a painful process. It's a painful process to break up with that image of heaven through sex. You're going to have to go through a grieving process. This process of waking up and living reality it's a harsh one, especially if you've been consistently avoiding reality by living in this virtual fantasy world of porn. It's hard to wake up and realize, dang, man, yeah, I might never have sex with thousands of women. I might have to walk down the street, and instead of immediately jump into a fantasy world where I'm having sex with an attractive woman that's walking by me, I might have to actually walk by her and realize that, yeah, she doesn't know who I am, and she probably never will. And learn how to not hate yourself in that, and find your own value and your own purpose and your own goodness and all that kind of stuff. And so if you do this, if you learn how to disconnect from this illusion, it puts you in the position to really, I think, actually appreciate female beauty in a healthy way. It'll allow you to enjoy female companionship and beauty in a way where it's not you being manipulated. And the funny thing about all of this is, I wonder why this idea of displaying your flesh as a woman is empowering. I'm wondering why this idea has come up. And I mentioned a little bit in the beginning about why I think it is, but I think there could potentially even be a deeper reason. I think all these women are showing off their bodies constantly, consciously or unconsciously, is because they want to find the guy who they can't control with their body. They want to find the guy who can see them in all of their beauty and be attracted to them but not need them. And this is why I think part of the pickup artist stuff works, where a lot of their content is about how to put a woman down, learning how to, they call it negging. It's the idea of all right, I'm going to actually make fun of this girl. I'm going to pretend like I don't need her. And in doing that, you kind of break that manipulative hold that she has on you. I mean, if you're just playing the game and it's fake, well, that's not really what's happening, but you can make it seem like it is. And that makes you more attractive. And so I think it's all these women showing off their bodies, they're desperately seeking for a man who isn't affected by it, who is able to then love her for who she is rather than for what she looks like. And the fact that he's pursuing her, it's because he's choosing to, not because he's compelled to by his penis. And ultimately, it's that kind of attention that's far more valuable to a woman than just kind of this mindless sex slave that the majority of men are today through their conditioning. So don't be that guy. Do the work to get control of your sexuality. And I think ultimately it's going to help you out a tremendous amount. So let me know what you guys think. Please please subscribe. Please, come see me live. I stream Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. And until then, stay sharp.